Deebo Samuel, Garrett Wilson, and Cooper Kupp could be available for a trade should the Denver Broncos make a move for one of them, two of them, all three of them. Todd, what do you think?
Oh, dang, just starting off with me, huh?
Starting off hot, baby.
There's definitely one guy that is probably at the top of my list, and that's Garrett Wilson. He's the youngest. He's an elite receiver, almost top on the edge.
That's the question.
I don't know. But I think he's good enough to be somebody that you go and get. Second would be Deebo Samuel. Third is Cooper Kupp, just because of those injuries. But ultimately, if Garrett Wilson is there, if there's a trade that can be made that doesn't cost too much, because we are a young team and we're building with the draft capital that we have, plus this roster, I don't want to give up, a first and second and a third. Like, it has to be reasonable for us to make that happen.
So what's reasonable?
A second.
A second?
Yeah.
Second and a third?
In different years, yes.
So a second this year, third next year?
Yes.
Done deal.
Done deal.
Garrett Wilson's a Denver Bronco.
Yeah, I think that sounds
There's
good
a lot to unpack with what you said, though. But before we unpack that, Henry, what do you think? Second and a third for Garrett Wilson? Did
Probably
the Broncos
not.
make that trade?
It's just so much to be giving up. Like, I want those draft picks. Good teams build through the draft, and that's been true for forever. I'd much rather just draft a young guy than you don't have to worry about paying Garrett Wilson, doing that sort of stuff. Again, he'd be worth the money. He might wind up being worth the picks, but you're in a good spot. Just keep building. Don't be taking gambles,
You're not taking any gamble with Garrett Wilson. You know exactly what he is.
Yeah.
With the worst quarterback situation in the NFL over the past 3 years, he's been a 1,000-yard receiver every single year. That shows you're not gambling. In fact, the draft is gambling. Taking a receiver to try to be Garrett Wilson in the second round or the third round, those are gambles. Trading the second and third round pick for Garrett Wilson, knowing you're getting at worst a 1,000-yard receiver. And look, Bo Nix is better than Zach Wilson was with the Jets the 2 years that Garrett Wilson was with him. Bo Nix is better than Aaron Rodgers was last season. And so he's only going to elevate those numbers. And Garrett Wilson, this isn't like a Garrett Wilson, in my opinion, how I would build this, isn't a Garrett Wilson for Courtland Sutton. No, you're keeping Court. You're building this wide receiver room with Courtland Sutton, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Mims, and then coming in relief is Devon Vele. I love this. And then, heck, maybe after this final year of Courtland Sutton's deal, you've seen enough from Devon Vele where you say, okay, we're going to put him in instead of Courtland. You move on from Courtland to save some money there, and boom, you're ready to rock and roll. But for this year, oh my gosh, you went from like a very questionable wide receiver room. Now you have a legit one. Maybe you have two legit ones in that receiver room, and then Marvin Mims, who had 4 touchdowns. I mean, I'm all in for this. In fact, I might be able to be pressed to give that 20th pick up for Garrett Wilson. But if I can do it with a second and a third, and heck, throw in a fifth, it's without I'm not even thinking about it. It's a done deal.
The risk, though, is that if he gets 1,000 yards next year and you gave up a second and a third and you take on his contract situation, you'd made a horrible deal. Like, you need 1,200 for that to be worth it. And that's the part where I'm just not sure that he's that type of player. Like, again, when you go from being kind of the only functional piece of an offense to now being like worked into an ecosystem, he's a good player. They would obviously get a lot better, and it'd be really exciting if it happens. But again, I just don't think that I'm cashing in those chips now and hoping that Garrett Wilson all of a sudden becomes a Pro Bowl type receiver when he hasn't been that in the first few years.
Well, so let me ask you, why are you concerned that he has hit over 1,100 receiving yards? Why are you saying that he needs 100 more, and you're worried that going from Zach Wilson was a starting quarterback along with 3 others when he had 1,100 passing or receiving yards.
Yeah.
Why don't you think he'd be able to get just 100 more?
Well, we talked about this earlier in the week, but I mean, he just gets targeted at such a high rate there because he's the only option. I think it was like 154 targets this year. You give that to Courtland Sutton, you're talking about 1,300-yard receiver.
But that's not true because we broke it down, and Courtland Sutton has the same completion percentage when thrown to. So
but then there's the depth of target. There's the depth of target on top of that. Where it's Garrett Wilson, you have more underneath stuff. With Court, it's further downfield. So even the completion percentage is different. Like, that just varies based on whether you're throwing high percentage passes or low percentage passes.
You're changing the bar.
No, I'm not changing the bar. I think Garrett Wilson's a good receiver. I just think that, again, like, you need him to all of a sudden become... If he doesn't make a Pro Bowl next year, then we're saying this was a terrible trade. And I just don't know that that's going to happen.
I don't agree.
For a second and third round pick, when's the last time you've traded that much for a player? And
Russell Wilson.
Terrible. But when's the last time somebody did it, didn't get a Pro Bowler, and then said, yep, we're glad we did that?
I think a second and a third pick actually would be a deal for the Broncos because he was a first-round pick.
True.
and then he has put up 1,000-yard seasons.
10th overall.
Yeah, like I think that's a steal for the Broncos. And to your point about him being heavily targeted in New York, I think that's true. But also he's being like heavily covered. I think if he comes here, he has more ability to actually spread the field. And, Sean likes to have a high guy, low guy, medium guy. He actually has more catch and run ability in this offense as opposed to Nathaniel Hackett offense. I think he has more ability to get more yards and make big plays. And maybe he doesn't need the 150 targets. Maybe he can do it on 100 targets and still have a successful season.
I also think this is realistic. Aaron Rodgers was just informed by the Jets that they are officially moving on from him. They're moving on from Aaron Rodgers, taking a $45 million dead cap hit. Look, we saw the Broncos do it already. So it's possible to rebuild and rebuild quickly with that dead cap. But the Jets are starting. It really seems like they're going all the way down and building this thing up from the ground, which means a full rebuild, which means, are you going to want to pay a guy at receiver $20, $25, $30 million per year when you're in a full rebuild? Plus, Garrett Wilson doesn't want to be there. He's made that very clear. Now with moving on from Aaron Rodgers, he might just say, I demand out. And if he demands out, we know the Jets GM, Darren Muge, is close with the Broncos. That's the only team he's worked for before getting this job with the Jets. There's that open line of communication between him and Broncos general manager George Payton. So I don't think this is just like a dream world that we're living in right now. Would I, put money on saying that's going to happen? No, because he's still with the Jets right now. But I think that this is realistic for this to happen right now. It does not seem like Garrett Wilson's happy, and that's before the Jets kind of are openly admitting they're doing a full rebuild.
Yeah, I would be shocked if they trade him. I think that you want to keep your good players, especially a 25-year-old. Like I think we decided he gets $16 million, not this year, but next year. I think at that point you're done paying Aaron Rodgers anyway. No, you'd have the lower half of the cap hit probably. But again, that's hitting at a good time. They aren't cash strapped the way the Broncos were with the Russell Wilson trade. So I doubt they move him. Like maybe there's a chance if you offer enough, but I don't think it's going to happen.
You don't think they'd want to move a non-Pro Bowl receiver that just only can put up 1,000 yards?
I don't think they have a reason to. I think they like him. Again, if you're the Chiefs, then go ahead and do it. If you're the Eagles, don't need one. Rams, if they get rid of Cooper Kupp, then go ahead and do it. But the Broncos just aren't in a situation where you give up all these assets to go get one piece and say like, hey, if this works, then we're set. Like you keep building organically for a couple years, and then you get to that point where it makes more sense to make a move like that.
Doing this move would be exactly what the Texans did last year when they went out and traded a second-round pick.
And then what happened?
He got hurt.
Yeah, exactly. But then the team didn't get any better.
Stephon Diggs is also, 29, 30 years old? Garrett Wilson, we're talking about a 25-year-old who isn't just going to be on a one-year deal if the Broncos trade for him. He'd be there for the next, you'd hope at least one more contract, if not something other than that.
But is there an example of it working? Because I know teams have done this sort of thing before. And I don't think they should, but I
can't think off the top of my head every trade that's been done for a second round.
Tyreek Hill worked. Yeah, that was for a first rounder, but
for
the
even more,
Dolphins,
they gave up even more. Yep.
Yeah.
So really quick,
do you think the Dolphins regret that trade now?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
He almost had a 2,000-yard season.
Yep.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Really quick,
They're going to trade him again, though.
Let's get everyone's thoughts on Cooper Kupp. Should the Broncos make a deal for Cooper Kupp?
No. Again, you don't give up assets to pay somebody $20 million a year who's not what he was.
And who plays 66%, Henry, of the games. I agree with you. Maybe if they release him, then you pick him up. But right now in a trade, I don't think the Rams' phone is ringing off the hook.
Not at all.
Now, one more guy, Deebo Samuel. A joker. Could he be the perfect joker for the Broncos? Should the Broncos make a trade for him, Todd?
This is the tough one. I do think there should be a conversation there, but it has to be a really cheap one. We have to be kind of really winning the battle to be able to make that trade, just because he isn't who he used to be, but he still could be a dominant player. And like Hank said, we're not really in a position to make a run in the playoffs, but we do need more pieces. So he could be a valuable piece to us, but he just still can't have a strap for cash because we still have to play Russell Wilson. Mm-hmm. We still need to continue to build this team with draft picks. That's my answer.
Yeah. Again, if he was what he was 3 years ago, then sure. But He's still a useful player. He just isn't a game breaker. He's not a game changer. He's a guy who can throw out there. And giving up draft assets to pay him $17 million, just paying him $17 million in the first place would be insane. So giving up a draft pick to be able to pay him that, there's no way.
Yeah, not really either. And he's a joker, but Sean Payton doesn't want a wide receiver that's a joker. He told Kay Adams that he wants a joker that's tight end or running back. Deebo Samuel is not that, so it's just not a perfect fit. So I wouldn't hate it if they traded for him, but the price, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm pretty much all in on Garrett Wilson, out on the other two. Todd, you are second and third round pick for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
On Deebo, out on Cooper Kupp, and Henry, you're passing on all three. Is that right?
I'd give up like a second round pick.
Second round pick for Garrett Wilson?
Yeah.
But out on the other two?
I mean, if you can get him for $10 million a year, then that's great. But that's a different conversation for a month from now when they get cut.
So maybe we'll see another Wilson heading to Denver in a trade. That'll do it.